The Organisational Upheaval. There was a time when a table of organisation, sometimes familiarly known as a T/O, showed a neatly arrayed series of boxes, each indicating an officer and the organisational subunits for which he was responsible. Every bureaucracy of any size, whether it a corporation, a university, or a government agency, had its own TO, providing its managers with a detailed map of the organisational geography. Once drawn, such a map became a fixed part of the organisation's rulebook, remaining in use for years at a time. Today, organisational lines are changing so frequently that a 3-month-old table is often regarded as a historic artefact, something like the Dead Sea Scrolls. Organisations now change their internal shape with a frequency and sometimes a rashness that makes the head swim. Titles change from week to week, jobs are transferred, responsibilities shift. Vast organisational structures are taken apart, bolted together again in new forms, then rearranged again. Departments and divisions spring up overnight only to vanish in another and yet another reorganisation. In part, this frenzied reshuffling arises from the tide of mergers and demergers now sweeping through industry in the US and Western Europe. The late 60s saw a tremendous rolling wave of acquisitions, the growth of giant conglomerates and diversified corporate monsters. The 70s may witness an equally powerful wave of divestitures and later reacquisitions as companies attempt to consolidate and digest their new subsidiaries, then trade off troublesome components. Between 1967 and 69, the Questor Company, formerly Dunhill International Incorporated, bought 8 companies and sold off 5. Scores of other corporations have similar stories to tell. According to management consultant Alan J. Zacon, there will be a great deal more spinning off of pieces. As the consumer marketplace churns and changes, companies will be forced constantly to reposition themselves in it. International reorganisation almost inevitably follows such corporate swaps, but they may arise for a variety of other reasons as well. Within a recent 3-year period, fully 66 of the 100 largest industrial companies in the United States publicly reported major organisational shake-ups. Actually, this was only the visible tip of the proverbial iceberg. Many more reorganisations occur than are ever reported. Most companies try to avoid publicity when overhauling their organisation. Moreover, constant, small and partial reorganisations occur at the department or divisional level or below and are regarded as too small or unimportant to report. My own observation as a consultant, says Dr. Daniel, an official of McKinsey & Company, a large management consulting firm, is that one major restructuring every 2 years is probably a conservative estimate of the current rate of organisational change among the largest industrial corporations. Our firm has conducted over 200 organisation studies for domestic corporate clients in the past year, and organisational problems are an even larger part of our practice outside the United States. What's more, he adds, there are no signs of a levelling off. If anything, the frequency of organisational upheavals is increasing. These changes, moreover, are increasingly far-reaching in power and scope, says Professor L.E. Greiner, Greiner, of the Harvard Graduate School of Business Administration. Whereas only a few years ago the target of organisational change was limited to a small work group or a single department, the focus is now converging on the organisation as a whole, reaching out to include many divisions and levels at once, and even the top managers themselves. He refers to revolutionary attempts to transform organisation at all levels of management. If the once fixed table of organisation won't hold still in industry, much the same is increasingly true of the great government agencies as well. There is scarcely an important department or ministry in the government of the technological nations that has not undergone successive organisational change in recent years. In the United States, during the 40-year span from 1913 to 53, despite depression, war and other social upheavals, not a single new cabinet-level department was added to the government. Yet, in 1953, Congress created the Department of Health, Education and Welfare. In 1965, it established the Department of Housing and Urban Development. In 1967, it set up the Department of Transportation, thus consolidating activities formerly carried out in 30 different agencies. And at about the same time, the President called for a merger of the Department of Labour and Commerce. Such changes within the structure of government are only the most conspicuous, for organisational tremors are similarly felt in all the agencies down below. Indeed, internal redesign has become a byword in Washington. In 1965, when John Gardner became Secretary of Health, Education and Welfare, a top-to-bottom reorganisation shook that department. Agencies, bureau and offices were realigned at a rate that left veteran employees in a state of mental exhaustion. During the height of this reshuffling, one official, who happens to be a friend of mine, used to leave a note behind for her husband each morning when she left for work. The note consisted of her telephone number for that day, so rapid were the changes that she could not keep a telephone number long enough for it to be listed in the departmental directory. Mr. Gardner's successors continued tinkering with organisation, and by 1969 Robert Finch, after 11 months in office, was pressing for yet another major overhaul, having concluded in the meantime that the department was virtually unmanageable in the form in which he found it. In Self-Renewal, an influential little book written before he entered the government, Gardner asserted that the far-sighted administrator reorganises to break down calcified organisational lines. He shifts personnel, he redefines jobs to break them out of rigid categories. Elsewhere, Gardner referred to the crises of organisation in government and suggested that in both the public and private sectors, most organisations have a structure that was designed to solve problems that no longer exist. The self-renewing organisation he defined as one that constantly changes its structure in response to changing needs. Gardner's message amounts to a call for a permanent revolution in organisational life, and more sophisticated managers are recognising that in a world of accelerating change, reorganisation is and must be an ongoing process, rather than a traumatic, once-in-a-lifetime affair. This recognition is spreading outside the corporations and government agencies as well. Thus, the New York Times, on the same day that it reports on proposed mergers in the plastics, plywood and paper industries, describes a major administrative upheaval at the British Broadcasting Corporation, a thorough renovation of the structure of Columbia University, and even a complete reorganisation of that more conservative and most conservative of institutions, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. What is involved in all this activity is not a casual tendency, but a historic movement. Organisational change, self-renewal, as Gardner puts it, is a necessary and unavoidable response to the acceleration of change. For the individual within these organisations, change creates a wholly new climate and a new set of problems. The turnover of organisational designs means that the individual's relationship to any one structure with its implied set of obligations and rewards is truncated, shortened in time. With each change, he must reorient himself. Today, the average individual is frequently reassigned, shuffled about from one substructure to another. But even if he remains in the same department, he often finds that the department itself has been shifted on some fast changing table of organisation, so that his position in the overall maze is no longer the same. The result is that man's organisational relationships today tend to change at a faster pace than ever before. The average relationship is less permanent, more temporary than ever before.